Before we begin, it is important to understand that the albums covered in this video explore some of the darkest, most unsettling corners of the human experience. Themes of death, despair, mental illness, trauma, and existential dread are woven into the music you're about to learn about. Some of these works are emotionally intense, disturbing, and confrontational, pushing the boundaries of what many would consider comfortable listening. This video is not for everyone. If you are sensitive to dark, disturbing content, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The intent here is not to glorify or sensationalize these themes, but to explore how music can reflect the complexities of the human condition, even when it ventures into uncomfortable territory. Proceed with caution as we descend the abyss.
Hey, before we dive into Tier 2, I just wanted to take a quick moment to talk about something with you guys. In the first video, I used a voice changer to give things a more deeper and eerie tone. Some of you liked it, others felt it took away from the experience. So for this video, I'm recording without the voice changer just to see how it feels. I'd love to know if you guys like the more natural voice or if you like the deeper altered tone. Just let me know in a comment which version you like better. Your feedback helps me make these videos better. Thank you for watching. Welcome back to the weird, depressing, and disturbing albums Iceberg. In the first tier, we explored music that dealt with emotional collapse, isolation, and personal destruction. These albums challenged us to confront the darker aspects of the human experience, but we're far from finished. As we continue to descend through this iceberg, we'll uncover music that pushes even further, albums that challenge what we think music can be, albums that reflect deeper layers of human despair and existential dread. This journey will only grow stranger and more intense as we move forward, so prepare yourself for what lies ahead. In this video, we begin Tier 2, but remember, each tier brings us closer to the unknown, and what we'll encounter is more than just sound. It's an exploration of the darker truths hidden within the music itself. As we descend deeper into the iceberg, the music begins to break apart. Tier 2, Abyss of Fragmented Realities, takes us into a world where familiar structures collapse and music becomes something far more chaotic, more unsettling. The albums here challenge everything we know about music. They twist, distort, and dissolve into noise and disarray. This is where themes of madness, death, and decay take over. You'll hear soundscapes that feel unstable, teetering on the edge of chaos, and as we venture further into the abyss, the boundaries of reality itself begin to blur. This tier is overwhelming, vast, and fragmented, so we've split it into two parts. What lies ahead in part 1 is only the beginning of the descent into the unknown. Brace yourself. The deeper we go, the more unrecognizable the music and the world becomes. Swans, Soundtrack for the Blind. Our journey into the second tier begins with an album that is nothing short of an overwhelming force, an all-consuming sonic experience that stretches the boundaries of what music can be. This work is a massive, sprawling beast with tracks that move through layers of intensity, violence, and unsettling calm. It's not just an album, it's a sensory overload, pulling the listener into a dark, immersive world. The music here is relentless. It builds slowly, methodically, with a weight that becomes almost oppressive. At times, it feels like it's being dragged underwater, surrounded by sound that is both beautiful and terrifying. The structure is unpredictable, often abandoning traditional song forms in favor of long, droning passages that blur the line between music and pure atmosphere. This is an album that doesn't just play, it engulfs. Thematically, it feels like a reflection of life's most primal forces: birth, death, violence, and decay. It explores the fragility of the human condition, often pushing the listener to confront uncomfortable truths. The lyrics and vocal delivery can feel distant, detached, as if they are echoing from another dimension, adding to the eerie, disorienting nature of the experience. Time loses meaning as the tracks stretch out, hypnotic and consuming. What makes this entry so disturbing is its sheer scale. It demands patience, forcing the listener to sit with its length, its repetition, and its slow, inevitable buildup. There's a sense of dread that permeates the entire work, like something terrible is always on the horizon. Yet it never fully arrives. Instead, you're left suspended in a state of tension and unease. This isn't just music to listen to. It's music that engulfs, devours, and leaves you drained. It's a reminder of how overwhelming sound can be, and how it can push you to confront parts of yourself you'd rather avoid. The album feels like staring into the void, and finding that the void is staring back. Boards of Canada, Geogaddi. Our next descent into this tier brings us to an album that feels like a puzzle, filled with cryptic sounds, hidden messages, and an atmosphere that leaves you questioning what's real and what isn't. This is an album that lures you into its hypnotic, almost serene melodies, but beneath the surface, there's a deep sense of unease. It's as if the music is quietly whispering something unsettling, something you can't quite hear but can feel. The sound here is delicate, almost childlike at first, warm synths, looping rhythms, and distorted samples that create a dreamlike state. But the deeper you go, the more the dream begins to feel like a nightmare. It's a disorienting experience where sound from nature, snippets of human voices, and strange, almost imperceptible tones emerge to create an atmosphere that feels both nostalgic and deeply unnerving. There's a sense of hidden darkness throughout this album, as if it's playing with the idea of memory and perception. The music constantly hints at something darker lurking beneath the surface. Faint, manipulated voices and cryptic reversed messages woven into the sound. You're never quite sure if you're hearing something you should, or if the music is deliberately trying to lead you astray. It's unsettling in the subtlest way, making you question your own senses. Thematically, it explores ideas of control, nature, and the manipulation of sound and meaning. There's an ambiguity to it, a sense that the more you try to understand, the more it slips away. It's like listening to a broadcast from another world, familiar yet distorted, comforting yet ominous. This album doesn't confront you directly with darkness. Instead, it surrounds you with an eerie calm, quietly unsettling you without ever breaking the surface. It's the kind of music that lingers in your mind long after it ends, leaving you with the strange feeling that something isn't quite right, but you can't put your finger on it. It's a descent into the uncanny, where reality feels fragile and distorted, and the deeper you listen, the more you're drawn into its strange, hypnotic world. Captain Beefheart and his magic band, Trout Mask Replica. Our next descent into the abyss takes us to one of the most chaotic and bewildering albums ever created. This isn't just music. It's a complete rejection of traditional structure, melody, and rhythm. Trout Mask Replica stands as an avant-garde masterpiece that challenges the listener at every turn, pushing boundaries in ways that leave many questioning if it's genius or madness. This album is a relentless assault on the senses. At first listen, the songs feel disjointed, clashing rhythms, offbeat melodies, and Captain Beefheart's growling, often nonsensical vocals. It's like being thrown into a musical blender where nothing quite fits. Each track feels like a bizarre puzzle with no clear solution, leaving you with a sense of disorientation. But beneath the chaos, there's something strangely captivating. The album blends elements of blues, jazz, and rock, but in ways that seem completely deconstructed. It's an exploration of sound as something raw, unpredictable, and entirely free from the constraints of conventional music. The result is unsettling, as if you're listening to the unraveling of music itself. Thematically, Trout Mask Replica doesn't follow the usual rules. There are no clear stories or messages to grasp onto, just surreal and often absurd imagery. It's as if Captain Beefheart is inviting the listener to step into his fractured kaleidoscope world, a world where logic and reason no longer exist. The disorienting nature of this album is what makes it so deeply unsettling. It's not just difficult to listen to, it's impossible to pin down. It feels like madness captured on tape, yet it's delivered with a conviction that forces you to keep listening, even as it defies understanding. In the end, Trout Mask Replica leaves you with more questions than answers. Is it a brilliant work of art, or a descent into musical chaos? Whatever the answer, it remains one of the most challenging and polarizing albums ever created, pulling listeners into its fragmented reality and refusing to let go. Coil, the Ape of Naples. Our next descent into the abyss takes us to a work that feels like both a haunting farewell and an eerie reflection of death. The Ape of Naples by Coil isn't just an album, it's a final chapter, filled with the weight of loss and the spectral presence of one of its creators who passed away before its completion. This album is haunted by death in more ways than one, and every track is soaked in a sense of closure that feels almost tangible. The music itself is unlike anything Coil had done before. It's less chaotic than some of their earlier works, but far more emotionally raw. There's an unsettling beauty here, a balance of dark, moody soundscapes and moments of quiet reflection. The album feels like a journey through a twilight world where the boundaries between life and death, past and present, are blurred. Lyrically, the album confronts themes of loss, transformation, and the inescapable presence of death. There's a sense that the music is pulling the listener towards something final, something inevitable, and yet it's delivered with a kind of serenity that makes it all the more disturbing. It's like staring into the void but finding an eerie calm in the darkness. What makes the Ape of Naples so deeply unsettling is its context. Released after the death of John Balance, one of Coil's founding members, the album feels like a sonic eulogy, filled with a sorrow that's palpable yet never overwhelming. The music ebbs and flows between moments of beauty and discomfort, creating a tension that lingers throughout the album. This isn't just an exploration of death, but of the strange peace that comes with acceptance. It's an album that confronts mortality head-on, but does so in a way that's unnerving in its calmness. Listening to the Apes of Naples feels like wandering through the afterlife, uncertain, but somehow resigned to what's waiting on the other side. In the end, it leaves you with a sense of finality, a quiet reminder that even in death, there's beauty, but also an unavoidable sense of loss that stays with you long after the music fades. Einsturzende Neubauten, Halber Mensch. Our next descent into the abyss takes us to a place where the line between humanity and machinery begin to blur. Halber Mensch by Einsturzende Neubauten is a sonic assault, an album built from the sound of industrial decay, twisted metal, and fractured rhythms. This isn't music for the faint of heart. It's an exploration of dehumanization, where the harsh sounds of machinery reflect a world that feels cold, mechanical, and broken. At its core, Halber Mensch translates to half-human, and that title perfectly encapsulates the themes of this album. The music feels like it was torn from a dystopian future, a world where humanity has been reduced to fragments, swallowed by the relentless march of industrialization. Every track is drenched in dissonance, with pounding percussion, scraping metal, and distorted vocals that sound more like desperate cries than lyrics. The album is less about melody and more about texture. The texture of destruction, the sound of things falling apart. It was created using unconventional instruments and methods, like hitting scrap metal, drilling into concrete, and amplifying the sound of things breaking. There's something disturbingly primal about it, like the soundtrack to a world where civilization has collapsed and all that's left is noise and chaos. Lyrically, Halber Mensch deals with themes of isolation, alienation, and the erosion of identity. There's a deep sense of unease running through every track, as if the music is not just reflecting a world in ruins, but actively participating in its destruction. The vocals, often delivered in a robotic and emotionless manner, amplify the feeling of being trapped in a world that has lost its humanity. What makes this album so disturbing is its relentless assault on the senses. It refuses to comfort the listener. Instead, it overwhelms, forcing you to confront the cold, hard reality it presents. It's a world where warmth has been replaced by steel, where emotion has been reduced to the sound of grinding machinery, and where human spirit is slowly being erased. Halber Mensch doesn't just ask what it means to be human. It suggests that, in this world, humanity is something already lost. It's a bleak, haunting reflection of a future that feels closer with every passing day. Aphex Twin, Selected Ambient Works, Volume 2. Our next descent takes us into a world that feels distant, unfamiliar, and unsettling in its stillness. Selected Ambient Works, Volume 2 by Aphex Twin isn't just an ambient album. It's a soundscape that pulls you into a dreamlike state where reality blurs and the familiar becomes strange. There's something deeply haunting about this album, not because it's loud or aggressive, but because it creates an atmosphere that feels both vast and isolating, like being lost in a place where nothing quite makes sense. The music is abstract with no clear melody or structure to hold on to. Each track feels like a different alien world, shapeless and unformed, yet filled with a subtle sense of dread. There are no lyrics to guide you, no conventional rhythms to follow. Instead, the album drifts, creating a space where the listener is left to wander through eerie, often unsettling landscapes of sound. What's most disturbing about this album is its ambiguity. It doesn't tell you how to feel. The tracks are named with cryptic titles or left unnamed altogether, leaving the listener in a state of uncertainty. Is this music peaceful, or is there something sinister lurking beneath the calm surface? The longer you listen, the more the atmosphere begins to shift, from serene to disquieting, from beautiful to unnerving. The use of dissonant tones, subtle distortions, and strange, almost imperceptible sounds lurking in the background creates a sense of unease that builds slowly. It's as if something is always just out of reach, hiding in the corners of your perception, never fully revealing itself. The album feels like a forgotten memory, or a dream slipping away as you awake. Its meaning elusive, yet its presence undeniable. Selected Ambient Works Volume 2 doesn't scream to be heard, it whispers, inviting you to listen closely, to drift deeper into its strange ambient world. But the more you listen, the more it leaves you feeling unsettled, as if you've glimpsed something you weren't meant to see. It's an exploration of the unknown, and with every track, you sink further into the abstract and the unfamiliar. And this is music that leaves you questioning not just what you're hearing, but what you're feeling. It's not just ambient, it's haunting in the quietest way possible. Xiu Xiu, A Promise. Our next descent takes us into a space of deep emotional turmoil, an album that confronts the listener with raw, unfiltered pain. A Promise by Xiu Xiu is not just difficult to listen to, it's emotionally harrowing. This isn't music that hides behind metaphor or subtlety. Instead, it forces you to sit with the darkest aspects of the human experience: trauma, fear, isolation, and self-destruction. From the very first track, it's clear that this album is built on vulnerability. The music shifts between soft, fragile melodies and jarring, dissonant noise, mirroring the emotional instability that runs through every song. There's a deep discomfort in the way the album sounds, as if the music itself is on the verge of breaking apart. It's chaotic, unpredictable, and always teetering on the edge of collapse. Lyrically, A Promise is brutal in its honesty. It deals with themes of sexual trauma, and mental illness, and feelings of intense alienation. The lyrics are often delivered in a trembling voice filled with anguish and fear, making each line feel like a confession, one that's both heartbreaking and disturbing. There's no distance between the listener and the pain being expressed. It's direct, immediate, and impossible to ignore. The contrast between the fragile, haunting moments of quiet and the violent outbursts of noise creates a tension that never lets up. You're constantly being pulled between moments of sorrow and moments of overwhelming emotional intensity, creating a feeling of deep unease. The music feels like a cry for help, but one that's filled with both rage and despair. What makes A Promise so disturbing is the way it refuses to offer any kind of resolution. The pain expressed throughout the album feels unresolved, and as if it's still raw, still bleeding. There's no sense of catharsis, no comforting message at the end. Instead, the album leaves you with the weight of that pain, forcing you to confront it head on. This is music that doesn't just reflect trauma, it embodies it. Listening to A Promise feels like walking through someone's most painful memories, where every sound, every lyric cuts deeper. It's an album that pushes the listener to the edge, and by the time it ends, you're left emotionally drained, haunted by the intensity of what you've just heard. We're halfway through part 1 of Tier 2, Abyss of Fragmented Realities. So far, we've encountered albums that distort reality itself, sounds that are fragmented, chaotic, and completely unbound by conventional music rules. It's been a disorienting experience, to say the least, and the deeper we go, the stranger it will get. How you feeling? These albums can be hard to digest. They challenge not just our ears, but our understanding of music itself. It's a lot to take in, so take a moment to collect your thoughts. If you're enjoying this dive so far, don't forget to hit that like button, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you're new here or just following along, be sure to subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more to come. And trust me, part 2 of Tier 2 will push us even further into the unknown. So let's take a breath and let us prepare to descend even deeper into the abyss of fragmented realities. Sonic Youth, Confusion is Sex. Our next step into the abyss brings us to an album that feels like pure disarray, where chaos and noise collide to create something deeply unsettling. Confusion is Sex by Sonic Youth is a raw, abrasive experience, a primal expression of frustration and disorientation. This isn't an album that cares about melody or structure. Instead, it strips everything down to its harshest elements, leaving behind a sound that feels unpredictable and, at times, hostile. The music is jagged, filled with feedback, distortion, and unconventional guitar tunings. Every song feels unpolished, like it's on the verge of falling apart. But that's the point. Confusion is Sex thrives on dissonance and instability, pushing the boundaries of what rock music can be. It's an experiment in tension, where every note feels like a clash rather than a resolution. Lyrically, the album explores themes of identity, alienation, and confusion, mirroring the chaotic soundscapes with fragmented, almost cryptic messages. There's a sense of searching in these songs, but no clear answers. It's like the band is fighting against something intangible, trying to express something that can't be fully articulated through conventional means. The disorienting nature of the album is amplified by its lo-fi production. The sound is murky, making it hard to find solid ground. Tracks bleed into one another, and there's a constant feeling of unease, as if the music is designed to keep you off balance. You're never quite sure where it's going, and that uncertainty is what makes it so unsettling. What makes Confusion is Sex so disturbing is its refusal to offer any kind of comfort. It's not here to soothe or provide catharsis. It's here to confront. The jagged guitars, distorted feedback, and fragmented vocals all combine to create a sonic landscape that feels broken, but also defiant. This is an album that challenges the listener to sit in discomfort, to embrace confusion as a state of being. By the time it's over, you're left with the feeling that you've been dragged through something raw and unfiltered, a brutal, dissonant exploration of sound that leaves a lasting mark. Death Grips, No Love, Deep Web. Our next step into the abyss plunges us into a world of chaos, paranoia, and unfiltered aggression. No Love, Deep Web by Death Grips is a brutal, relentless assault on the senses, an album that strips away any pretense of control and unleashes a raw, confrontational energy. It's as if the music is fueled by rage, but underneath that anger lies a deep sense of alienation and unease. From the moment the first track hits, you're thrown into a world of distorted, pounding beats and jagged synths. The production is harsh, abrasive, and industrial, creating a sonic landscape that feels hostile, almost suffocating. The beats pulse with a relentless urgency, and the vocals are delivered with a manic intensity, as if the lyrics are being spit out in a frenzy of desperation. The themes of No Love, Deep Web reflect the same sense of isolation and paranoia. There's a feeling of being trapped in a digital dystopia where every move is monitored and every thought is exposed. The lyrics are cryptic, fragmented, filled with references to technology, surveillance, and self-destruction. It's an album that speaks to the anxiety of living in an age where privacy is an illusion and the walls are closing in. What makes this album so disturbing is how it combines that digital paranoia with raw human emotion. The aggression isn't just surface level. It's driven by a deeper sense of hopelessness and despair. The music feels like a fight against something intangible, a battle that's already been lost, but the fight continues out of sheer defiance. The artwork and release strategy for No Love, Deep Web only adds to its unsettling nature. The album cover is deliberately provocative and controversial, pushing boundaries in the same way the music does, and the decision to leak the album online before its official release gives it a sense of rebellion, a refusal to play by the rules. No Love, Deep Web is a soundtrack for a world on the edge, a brutal, abrasive, and unrelenting exploration of paranoia, alienation, and self-destruction. It's not here to comfort you. It's here to push you into the darkness and make you confront it head-on. By the time it's over, you're left with a sense of raw, emotional intensity, as if the album has stripped everything down to its most primal, aggressive core. Slint, Spiderland. Our next descent into the abyss brings us to an album that feels like a quiet nightmare unfolding in slow motion. Spiderland by Slint is eerie, sparse, and unsettling, not because of any overt aggression, but because of the tension that builds in the silence. This is an album that creeps up on you, where the spaces between the notes are as important as the music itself. It's a world of isolation, disconnection, and growing unease. The music on Spiderland is minimal and deliberate. The guitars are clean and precise, but they never fully resolve, leaving the listeners suspended in a state of tension. The rhythms are tight but never predictable, giving the songs a feeling of fragility, as if they're teetering on the edge of collapse. This creates a sense of unease, as if something terrible is about to happen, but it's always just out of reach. Vocally, the album is delivered in an almost monotone, half-spoken, half-sung style, adding to the feeling of detachment. The lyrics are cryptic, fragmented, painting abstract scenes that suggest isolation, fear, and the slow unraveling of the mind. There's a constant sense that the world being described in these songs is not quite right. Something is off. Something is lurking just beneath the surface. What makes Spiderland so disturbing is how it uses restraint to create fear. There are no explosive moments, no screams of anguish, just a slow, creeping dread that builds over time. The tension is almost unbearable at times, as the music seems to be holding something back, leaving the listener in a constant state of anticipation. It's like walking through a dark, empty house, knowing something is there, but never seeing it. The album's sparse instrumentation and whispered vocals make it feel intimate, but in a way that's deeply unsettling, like being trapped in someone else's nightmare. There's a profound sense of loneliness in these songs, a feeling of being cut off from the world and left alone with your thoughts, which are slowly spiraling out of control. Spiderland is not an album that shouts, it whispers, leaving you in a sense of quiet dread that lingers long after the final track fades. It's a haunting reflection on isolation, fear, and the fragile boundaries between reality and nightmare. A silver Mount Zion. He has left us alone, but shafts of light sometimes grace the corners of our rooms. Our next descent brings us to an album that feels like a quiet meditation on loss and mourning, where the echoes of grief are ever present but occasionally interrupted by small, fragile moments of hope. He has left us alone, but shafts of light sometimes grace the corners of our rooms by a silver Mount Zion is not just an album, it's a deeply emotional experience filled with sorrow and longing. The music here is sparse, with strings and pianos creating a haunting, almost ghostly atmosphere. There's an aching beauty in these compositions, a sense that the world has fallen apart, but small glimmers of light occasionally break through. It's like standing in the aftermath of something devastating, yet finding brief moments of peace in the wreckage. The album was written in response to the death of a loved one, and that weight of personal loss is present in every note. But rather than confront death with anger or despair, the music takes a quieter, more introspective approach. It feels like a long, slow breath, an attempt to make sense of loss or perhaps just sit with it in all its pain and complexity. There are no lyrics in most of this album, but when vocals do appear, they are fragile, as if they are being sung from a place of deep reflection. The lack of words only adds to the feeling of emotional rawness, as the music itself seems to speak what words cannot. The sparse instrumentation and repetitive motifs give the album a meditative quality, as if the listener is being invited to sit in stillness and feel the weight of everything that's been lost. The title itself suggests this duality. He has left us alone, but shafts of light sometimes grace the corners of our rooms. There's a profound sense of absence, of being left behind, but also an acknowledgement that even in the darkest moments, there are small traces of hope, fleeting though they may be. What makes this album so haunting is its ability to balance despair with beauty. It doesn't shy away from the reality of loss, but it also doesn't give in to complete hopelessness. Instead, it lingers in the fragile space between sorrow and grace, leaving the listener to reflect on their own experiences of loss and the light that sometimes finds its way through the cracks. By the time this album ends, you're left with a feeling of quiet contemplation, as if you've been allowed a glimpse into someone's most private grief, a space where sadness and beauty coexist side by side. Godspeed You, Black Empire, F sharp, A sharp, Infinity. Our next descent in the abyss takes us to an album that feels like the soundtrack to the end of the world. F sharp, A sharp, Infinity by Godspeed You, Black Emperor is a sprawling, apocalyptic journey that evokes images of cities in ruin, a world in collapse, and the faintest glimmer of hope struggling to survive amidst the chaos. This isn't just an album, it's an experience that unfolds like a dystopian narrative, a glimpse into a future where society has crumbled and all that's left are echoes of what once was. The music is slowly building, often starting in near silence before gradually swelling into massive orchestral walls of sound. The compositions stretch out over long, drawn-out movements, making the listener feel like they're watching a world unravel in real time. Strings, guitars, and ambient noise blend together to create something that feels both beautiful and terrifying, like watching the last moments of a dying star. One of the most unsettling aspects of F-sharp A-sharp Infinity is its use of spoken word samples, distorted, haunting monologues that sound like they're being broadcast from a forgotten radio station in the middle of an apocalyptic wasteland. These snippets of speech speak of collapse, isolation, and the loss of hope, adding a human element to the album's otherwise abstract soundscapes. But even in the bleakness, there's a strange kind of beauty. The album doesn't just reflect destruction, it also captures the quiet moments of reflection that come in the aftermath. It's as if the music is asking, what happens after everything falls apart? What remains when the dust settles and the world we once knew is gone? There are moments where the music feels almost transcendent, as if trying to find meaning in the chaos. The album's sprawling, near hour-long structure feels infinite, fitting the infinity symbol in the title. It's a cynical journey, one that doesn't offer easy answers or resolution. Instead, it leaves the listener suspended in a state of uncertainty, like standing at the edge of a vast, unknowable void. What makes F-sharp A-sharp Infinity so deeply unsettling is its ability to capture both the grandeur and the terror of collapse. The music ebbs and flows between moments of haunting beauty and overwhelming dread, leaving you to navigate a landscape that feels vast, empty, and desolate. By the time the album ends, you're left with the sense that something has ended, but the question of what comes next still lingers in the air, unanswered. This is music that doesn't just reflect despair, it embodies it, taking the listener on a journey through a world that feels both familiar and foreign, collapsing and infinite, all at once. Have a Nice Life, Deathconciousness. Our next descent brings us to an album that feels like it was made in the depths of isolation, where the weight of existence itself becomes overwhelming. Deathconciousness by Have a Nice Life is a sprawling, lo-fi masterpiece that explores the darkest corner of the human mind. Loss, despair, and the terrifying void that exists beyond our understanding of life and death. From the very first note, Deathconciousness pulls you into a world that feels both haunting and intimate. The production is intentionally murky, with reverb-soaked guitars and distant, echoing vocals that sound as if they're coming from a place far removed from reality. It's an album that feels buried under layers of grief, creating an atmosphere that's as claustrophobic as it is expansive. Musically, the album blends elements of post-punk, shoegaze, and industrial, but its true power lies in the emotional weight it carries. The songs feel like they're crumbling under the pressure of their own themes: existential dread, the loss of faith, and the inescapable pull of death. There's a relentless sense of melancholy throughout the album, but it's never overdramatic. Instead, it's quiet, resigned, and deeply unsettling. Thematically, Deathconciousness is an exploration of life's biggest questions. Why are we here? What happens after we die? And does any of it even matter? The lyrics are often cryptic, filled with references to obscure historical and philosophical ideas, but they all point back to the same core fear, the meaninglessness of existence. There's a feeling of searching for answers, but never quite finding them, leaving the listener in a state of existential limbo. One of the most disturbing aspects of the album is how it lingers in its sadness. The songs build slowly, often stretching out over long, repetitive sections that feel like they're drawing you deeper into a void. There are moments of beauty here, but they're fleeting, quick flashes of light in an otherwise bleak landscape. The album doesn't offer any easy answers or moments of catharsis. Instead, it leaves you to sit with the questions, the uncertainty, and the overwhelming sense of despair. What makes Deathconciousness so deeply unsettling is its emotional honesty. It doesn't try to mask its sadness or offer any false hope. Instead, it embraces the darkness, confronting the listener with the harsh reality of existence and the inevitability of death. By the time the album ends, you're left with a feeling of profound emptiness, as if you've been staring into the void for far too long. This is an album that doesn't just explore death, it lives in it. And by the time it's over, you'll find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew about life, loss, and what comes after. Earl Sweatshirt, Some Rap Songs. Our next descent brings us to an album that feels like a fractured reflection of grief, mental health, and personal struggle. Some Rap Songs by Earl Sweatshirt is an intimate, experimental work that lays bare the raw complexities of loss and reflection. This isn't your typical rap album. It's a deeply introspective journey through the fragmented mind of someone trying to make sense of their own pain. Musically, Some Rap Songs is built on lo-fi production, with grainy samples, abstract loops, and chopped-up beats. The sound feels intentionally unpolished, like a collection of thoughts thrown together in the midst of an emotional breakdown. The songs are short, often ending abruptly, as if Earl is only giving us glimpses of the overwhelming emotion he's grappling with. Lyrically, the album deals with themes of grief, especially the loss of Earl's father. There's a sense of unfinished conversations, unresolved feelings, and the weight of trying to process a loss that cuts too deep to fully articulate. Earl's delivery is often understated, almost mumbled at times, but that only adds to the feeling of emotional exhaustion that runs through every track. It's as if he's speaking directly from the depths of his own pain, too tired to embellish or sugarcoat his feelings. One of the most striking aspects of Some Rap Songs is its disorienting structure. The beats are often off-kilter, looping in ways that feel hypnotic but unsettling, mirroring the fractured state of mind Earl is in. The samples, too, are layered in ways that feel like echoes from the past, distorted, distant memories that can never be fully grasped. What makes this album so powerful is its vulnerability. Earl doesn't shy away from the messiness of his emotions or the confusion of dealing with loss and mental health struggles. Instead, he leans into it, creating a work that feels deeply personal and unfiltered. The album feels like a snapshot of a mind in turmoil, one that's grappling with the weight of grief, self-doubt, and the pressure to keep moving forward even when everything feels like it's falling apart. At just 25 minutes long, Some Rap Songs leaves a lasting impact. Its brevity and fragmented nature only enhance the sense of incompleteness that grief often brings, the feeling that something is missing, that the story is unfinished. There's no easy resolution here, no grand statement to tie everything together. Instead, the album leaves you in the middle of the storm, with all the confusion, pain, and rawness that comes with it. Some Rap Songs is an exploration of inner chaos, a reflection of the struggles we carry, and a reminder that sometimes the only way to process pain is to let it spill out, raw and unfiltered. Burial, Untrue. Our final descent into Tier 2 Part 1 takes us to an album that feels like it was created in the shadows of a city at night. Untrue by Burial. This isn't an album about overt horror or chaos. Instead, it's a slow, haunting exploration of urban isolation, loneliness, and the quiet sense of loss that comes from a world that feels disconnected and distant. The music on Untrue is built from fragments of sound, ghostly vocal samples, crackling vinyl, and the distant hum of rain-soaked streets. It feels like a collection of forgotten moments pieced together into something ethereal and melancholy. Each track is layered with atmosphere, as if walking through the city in the early hours of the morning, surrounded by emptiness with only the echoes of the past to keep you company. There's a sense of detachment here, both in the music and the themes it evokes. The chopped-up vocal samples are distorted and haunting, sounding like voices from another world, barely there, distant, like they're calling out from a place just out of reach. These fragments of human connection are scattered throughout the album, but they never fully coalesce. Instead, they linger, incomplete, leaving the listener with a sense of unresolved yearning. The production is intentionally lo-fi, filled with sounds of static, crackles, and distortion. This gives the album a raw, almost decayed feel, as if the music itself is crumbling under the weight of the emotions it's trying to convey. The beats are heavy, yet slow, dragging along like the pulse of a city that's lost its rhythm. Untrue captures the feeling of isolation in a world that's constantly moving. It's an album that reflects the loneliness of modern life, where people pass by each other like ghosts, disconnected from one another and from themselves. There's a sense of loss here, not just personal loss, but the loss of meaning, of connection, of something greater that feels just beyond reach. What makes Untrue so haunting is the way it lingers. The music doesn't hit you with overt intensity. It seeps into your consciousness slowly, like mist rolling over empty streets. By the time it's over, you're left with a feeling of quiet sadness, a sense that something important has slipped away, never to return. In the end, Untrue is less about answers and more about atmosphere. It's an exploration of the spaces between things, the unspoken words, the missed connections, the emotions that remain unexpressed. It's a haunting reminder of the ways in which we can feel completely alone, even when surrounded by the noise and chaos of the world. That brings us to the end of part 1 of Tier 2. So far, we've explored albums that have fragmented our perception of music, pushing boundaries, creating atmospheres of disarray, and forcing us to confront isolation, chaos, and personal turmoil. Each album has taken us deeper into a world that feels unfamiliar, unsettling, and often overwhelming. But this is only the beginning. In part 2 of Tier 2, we'll descend even further into darker, more experimental territory, where the line between music and noise become even thinner, and the boundaries of reality itself begin to warp. If you've enjoyed the journey so far, don't forget to like the video and let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you're new here or just following along, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss part 2 of Tier 2 and the even deeper, more obscure layers of this iceberg that are still to come. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video as we continue our descent into the abyss of fragmented realities.